Hello and welcome, one and all, to the Intellectual Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, David Hopkins, humanities professor, your host and guide on our journey into things past, present, and future. I'm so pumped to be here today, pumped to have you along for the journey. I want to give a quick shout out to the country of Honduras. Yes, Honduras, I've noticed a steady uptick of followers from this country, and I appreciate you listening in. Thank you very much. And also here in the United States, Phoenix, Arizona, I see you out there, and I appreciate you listening as well. You know, last week we took a bit of a detour of our study of the genre wisdom literature and spent a week looking at TikTok. I think the topic is fascinating. I think the analysis of the legislation that Congress is trying to enact is even more important even than the ban itself. And we all, in the United States and everywhere, we need to spend time reading and understanding legislation that our politicians put forward, not the 30-second sound bites that the media and politicians use to sell us to support their, well, most of the time BS. But anyway, we're going to go back to our studies as we got a whole lot more wisdom literature and brilliant minds to look at so we can improve ourselves, improve our intellect, improve our thinking skills, and hopefully pick up wisdom to become better people overall. As the best way to next level ourselves is to read, study, and understand those great minds that have achieved immense success and have shaped the entirety of civilization. I mean, those are the people really that we should pay attention to, not the squawking heads on TV or YouTube influencers or Instagram people. I mean, these individuals are the ones that we should study, learn, and implement their teachings and their ideas into our lives whenever possible. And this week we have an icon. I mean, in the entirety of the Middle Ages, at least across the West anyway, this person has had such an immense and profound impact on our perspective of life. And his impact persists to this day, which we're going to get into. But our person of study is Thomas Aquinas. And before I go too far, let me just put this out there right now. Look, we're going to look at Aquinas, but please, if you will, go over to the show notes, click on the link to the Intellectual Freedom Substack page, and subscribe. Because on that Substack page, you can follow along what I talk about at a level, about 1,000 feet deeper than what I do here in the podcast. I give you free links to the greatest works for each person and topic that we discuss every week, because I don't want you to just take my word for everything. I want you to go deeper and more fully develop your thought process and your thinking skills and your own perspectives on these topics, as that's what the Intellectual Freedom Podcast is all about. But enough with the fluffy overview stuff. Let's get to it right now. Thomas Aquinas. You know how I love to dive into the background information of these incredible minds, and Aquinas is just another fascinating individual. Incredible, fascinating history. Now, he was born into a noble family, and he was an incredibly introspective child. And from an early age, he was pretty much determined that he wanted to go into the religious vocation. He was even a pious teenager. Now, not too many of us can probably say that. I know, I can't say that. But anyway, he tried to join a new religious order of teaching friars that was known as the Dominicans. Now, to put it mildly, this was something that his family definitely did not want to happen. I mean, to his family, this was a radical and alarming decision. And his mother especially was so adamant, she even responded by sending soldiers to bring him back from the Dominicans. Aquinas was then actually imprisoned. Yeah, his own mother had him imprisoned in a tower for more than 1 year, trying to teach him a lesson that he definitely wanted nothing to do with this group, until 1 year later, when Aquinas just refused to bend, they finally gave up their resistance. They threw up their hands, and they basically just allowed him to escape in the night. Now, the Dominicans saw right away that they had a new protege to study theology, and they sent him off to the University of Paris and then to the University of Cologne, both top flight intellectual institutions of the day in Europe. But that wasn't really the perspective of his classmates, and other students did not see the talent as the same way as some of his initial mentors did. And since he was kind of physically, he was a heavy set, he was a chubby kid, he was a quiet kid, they actually gave him a nickname. And his nickname was not too flattering, to say the least. He was nicknamed the Dumb Ox. So, although his classmates didn't see his talent, his reputation inside of the classroom with his teachers was the exact opposite. And it is said, and it's documented, that one of his most famous teachers of the time, his name was Albert the Great, reported that the, quote, lowing of this dumb ox would be heard throughout the entire world, end quote. Quite a prediction from one of the most stellar and most well-known theologians in the college, anyway, that he went to. And I guess we could say he nailed that prediction on the head, because literally his words still to this day resonate across the entirety of the world. So in the end, Thomas Aquinas was marked out for an academic career very early, and he went on to enjoy really a very highly successful university life. But internally, there was always this tension, and you can see this in his writings with Aquinas, between the religious and the philosophical impulses that were brewing simultaneously during the medieval tradition, and Aquinas just represents that so well. And Thomas's attitude towards philosophy, which in the end, he actually spent more time in philosophical side of things than he did his theological studies. But at the end of his life, rather than feeling content and satisfied with the stellar career he had developed, he had a near-death experience that had a profound impact on him. You can almost call it a mystical vision, kind of along the same lines to what we studied with the mystics just a few weeks ago, as he experienced what he apparently saw as a vision, a reflection back on his life. He was so overwhelmed by this experience, which was beyond the reach of reason and verbal language. After it was over, he reportedly dismissed all of his own writing, and he wrote down and he declared it, quote, "All I have written is straw," end quote. After his death, though, Aquinas, who is often just referred to as, we don't usually refer to Thomas Aquinas, and I've already been referring him to just as Aquinas. He was declared a saint in the Catholic Church and became its most prominent philosopher pretty much of all time up to that point in time in history. Some of his influence can be attributed to the central role played by the Catholic Church because, of course, they were the powerhouse of all learning and religion at the time. So if the church endorsed you, well, your reach would go really far and really wide. Sort of like, if you remember, those of you that were around, if you weren't around, in the 80s and 90s when Oprah Winfrey was at the pinnacle of her popularity, she had a book club. And if an author, it was like one of the greatest deals and one of the things these authors and writers strive for during the time. If they could get endorsed by Oprah and her book club, well, it was almost guaranteed they were going to become a New York Times bestseller. And that was kind of the Catholic Church. Catholic Church fully supports Aquinas, and voila, his fame just exploded. But the fact remains that his work still forms an extremely significant part of the active philosophical tradition and simultaneously contains the basic teachings of the Catholic Church. So, much of Aquinas' work is a commentary on the arguments that were advanced by his predecessors, which is pretty much the way a lot of philosophy comes to fruition. And as we get deeper into modernism and we look more at philosophers than theologians, this is a common practice. But Aquinas takes his own stand on individual issues. But at the same time, he is continually commenting on the opinions of famous authorities such as Plato and Aristotle, the Islamic philosopher Ibn Rushd, St. Augustine, Maimonides, as well as many others. We've already talked about all of his main influencers we've talked a lot about these main influencers in earlier episodes, and next week we move over to the Islamic tradition, and I can't wait to do that episode. But basically, Aquinas was, like most great theologians and philosophers, incredibly well read, and he built his ideas on the foundations of those that came before him. The systematic aspect of Aquinas' work sets out a relatively complete theory of human conduct and humankind's place in the universe, and more importantly, foreshadows the modern era in philosophy, where Aquinas probably put forth his most substantial argument in his work Summa Theologia. So the term summa literally means summary, but in an older sense of the word, it means a comprehensive treatise rather than just a summary, an abbreviation of a longer work. And this work is incredibly comprehensive. But we don't have time to go through hundreds and hundreds of pages of Aquinas. I leave that to the Aquinas experts. So if we're going to boil down Aquinas' work to just a couple moral theories, which of course we need to do in an episode like this, I would say these two theories stand out. The first theory is that of natural law. Now, this is going to be the focus for us for the bulk of this episode. So I want to make sure we go in detail into what natural law is and what I'm talking about when I say natural law. All of us need to know this theory. And so the Greeks, they set out and they developed this term. And then we see it again with the Stoics in Roman philosophy. But the theory of natural law, it has a really deep cosmological or metaphysical rooting that still remains a living theory today. And the theory of natural law holds that, how can I say this simply, that morality is comprised of a law higher than human law. Get this and burn it into your brain. That natural law holds that morality is comprised of a law higher than human law, which is inherent within the universal order. Natural law is an unbreakable, unarguable, undebatable. It is a fact. It is undeniable, and it's unmovable. In the Christian tradition, this morality is traced back to God, who has implanted something like a moral compass inside of you, inside of me, and inside of every single human being in the entire world. This natural law resides inside of our consciousness, and we are required, if we are going to be moral people, to follow its dictates. So in the Summa Theologia, which contains the classical formulation of natural law as a concept, Aquinas believes that the natural moral order finds expression in unalienable emotions, instincts, and desires. These are things that are set out in the precepts of natural law, which are based on just our natural human tendencies or inclinations for self-preservation, for reproduction, for marriage, for family life, for education, peace, and cooperation with others. I mean, in a basic survival context or as a baseline for life, you and I, we need these things as a human species to survive. We can't do it alone on our own. We're not like a lone wolf that can live our entire life separated and just being away from all humanity. Very, very, very few people could ever dream of even attempting that. But the more specific injunctions of natural law, they're accessible to us through the exercise of the faculty of reason. Now, it's at this point that Aquinas goes more intellectual, more rational, more ethical. But I'm going to stop right here with a natural law for a moment and give you the second moral theory, because I said there were two that Aquinas talked about. But rest assured, we're coming right back to this idea of natural law because it becomes the foundation of Western democracy. So, the second moral theory in Aquinas' work discusses the different virtues and vices and their relation to each other in incredible detail. He pays particular attention to what he calls the four cardinal virtues. And I think these four virtues are really important because if you can hold on to these four virtues and you can live your life by these four virtues, it would seem to me, and more importantly, as we're talking, according to Aquinas, you're going to be living a moral and an ethical life. So what are those four virtues? Here they are. Number one, fortitude, also known as courage. Having courage in your life to do things without fear and restraint from other people or other things that are holding you back. Number two, temperance, which you could also call discipline or moderation or constraint. The third one is justice. And the fourth one is prudence, which you could also be known as wisdom or judgment. Now, what can we say about these four virtues? I mean, really, how can we go wrong living a life of courage, a life of discipline, a life of being moral, and having the concept of justice and care for others and trying to practice wisdom and proper judgment? I mean, really, these are sort of things that we've heard over and over again by the wisest individuals that have ever walked the planet Earth. So do you think maybe those things are things that we should try and find a way to implement and execute on in our lives? And Aquinas pretty much sums up so much of what we've read so far. Now, one key thing as we transition into our deep dive into natural law and Western democracy, which of course kind of headlines the episode this week, understand that Aquinas was a working theologian. He was working within a religious tradition. But it's notable that these theories are not particularly religious or confined to the Christian faith. In fact, his religious argument is that religion it merely just elaborates upon the natural morality that we all are obliged to follow. So don't think that this concept of natural law that Aquinas came up with was just completely lock, stock, barreled into Christianity. Because they're not. I mean, things like keeping our promises, being generous, refraining from lying, refraining from murder, being disciplined, being humble, being kind. I mean, this gives rise, as we see in other traditions and cultures, to the ethics of reciprocity. Note especially like Hinduism and even Buddhism to a certain extent. So I don't want you to feel like when you read Aquinas, you're reading a deeply religious person. He was deeply religious, but he was also, as I've already mentioned, he was almost more taken by philosophy than he was with religion. So it cuts across whatever faith you may have or faith you don't have. So as we transition our talk into natural laws, yes, he's Christian. I mean, he was sainted of all things. It's indisputable. But from now forward, look at the idea of natural law that he developed, which, by the way, ultimately morphs and it appears in the United States of America. Oh, in our own Constitution, our own preamble to the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence, those natural laws that Aquinas talked about were moved forward and advanced through the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, and they become a cornerstone ultimately of Western democracy. So this is really important. So you need to get this. So whether or not natural law can survive the onslaught that it appears it's facing from postmodernism, some people even call it the end of truth, and this emerging thing that my opinion is fact to me, and you have to accept it no matter what. That kind of comment, that kind of world that we now find ourselves. But here we go. I'm not sure we can overstate how deeply significant these natural laws are to the survival of Western democracies in the United States, Europe, or anywhere that democracy exists. Natural law is important, and I've been hammering this point, almost to the point I feel like I'm repeating myself too much, and you might be thinking the same thing, but it provides the framework for understanding morality, ethics, and justice in the world as we know it. Because natural law suggests that there are certain principles that are inherent in this natural world, despite the meandering mentality of humans, where our opinions can change like the shifting of the wind. Natural law has served as a basis for determining what is right and wrong, just and unjust. And constitutions, it seems so far, must have this for a large democracy to survive. The people must agree on a core set of values, ethics, and morality. And if they don't, chaos ensues. Does it feel to you today, as you look out at the landscape of society, that in general, people are in agreement on issues of morality, ethics, and justice? Or does it feel like things are kind of falling apart? Does it feel like society is splintering? If you do feel that the seams are being ripped apart, well, you're experiencing a splintering of these core values, these core moral beliefs. Where does that feeling come from inside of you? If you have that feeling, well, part of it, or maybe much of it, is coming from the fact that society is losing a grip on what we are, who we are, and what we stand for, and what we have lived by and built up. Now, I know, many would say we're not prosperous here in the United States. The Western democracies are not. Well, I mean, let's just be honest. If you look back centuries, we are most definitely, undeniably, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we live a life that is 1,000 or 10,000 times cushier, safer, more equitable, and less dangerous than any prior generation on pretty much every single matrix you ever want to compare it against. One book I'm reading right now is Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. I'm sad to admit, as a humanities professor, I was never exposed to this classic, and my goodness. If you want to know how hard life was in America, even just 100 and some years ago, read that book. The living conditions of most people were simply abysmal. So the fact is, you can't find a data point anywhere that doesn't prove insane progress on nearly every front, despite our immense problems, along with many new problems that crop up. So yeah, if you've never read it, read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. It's a great read, but I'm digressing. Let me get back to natural law. I'll give you just a couple of obvious examples about natural law. One might argue that certain actions, such as a murder or a theft, are always wrong because they violate natural law principles of respect for life and property. A natural law can also be used to argue for certain human rights, such as the right to life. Shouldn't everyone everywhere agree? Society would crumble if we just all went around killing each other with M4s or AK-47s. Also, doesn't it seem reasonable and fair that we should be allowed the freedom to make our own decisions in what we want to pursue as a human being on this planet without some dictator or autocrat telling us exactly how to live our lives? And equity. Who should have the right to suppress and dominate another human being? Whether that be race, gender, economic state, or whatever other qualifier you want to use. So that idea of natural law has provided a foundation for our legal systems in the West since the preamble of the Constitution, which is just dripping with natural law. It suggests that the laws should be based on principles that are inherent in the natural world rather than arbitrary or man-made. This can lead to a more just and fair legal system that is grounded in objective principles rather than subjective opinions or interests. Overall, natural law can serve as a guide and does serve as a guide for individual societies and legal systems in determining what is right and wrong, just and unjust, and provides a framework for promoting human flourishing and well-being. I believe no other document so eloquently personifies natural law as the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration, it set the stage for our Constitution. It clearly communicates the intentions of the framers and the purpose to break free from tyranny. This document foreshadows the introduction to the highest law of the land, which would eventually, of course, become the Constitution. It's not the law itself. It does not define government powers or individual rights. It was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson and adopted by the Continental Congress during the scorching hot summer in 1776. And I think it's worthwhile for us to jump forward to this as we can see in action Aquinas' natural law concept in a political document. So here it is. As anyway, we should read these things often, and we need to, all Americans should be reminded of this. And if you're not from America, these ideas still come into play all across the West. But pay attention to the natural law overtones, as it isn't hidden. It's prominent. So let's read this through a big part of this. We're not going to read the whole thing verbatim. So here we go. Quote, "When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of the absolute tyranny over these states. Wow. I'm going to stop there. But when we read this, those words, my goodness. You know, Americans not known for great intellectuals, but I mean, during this period in the 1700s, I mean, we had so many intellectual heavyweights in this country that got involved in politics. Now we got a bunch of buffoons and dumb oxes in Washington, D.C. But, you know, as this document continues, it continues to make points about why the separation is needed. But you get the flavor here. It's good all Americans read this. And well, anyone interested in freedom should read it because it helps us appreciate the importance of natural law in our lives and in our governments, and why freedom is something we can't give away to a government so easily. Any government, and I do mean any government, including our current regimes in the United States, who act more and more like autocratic dictators versus caring about the people of the country. So, 1 second. Sorry, I needed to take a little drink of coffee there. So, we talked about how natural law was embedded into our Declaration of Independence, as well as what natural law actually is. But just as important is what happens to a society where the idea of natural law is discarded and ignored. I mean, if natural law is a powerful impact on the positive, it would stand to reason that if a society decides to throw it off and discard it, wouldn't it also cause an equally powerful whiplash in the other direction? And what could be the implication of a civilization when natural laws are ignored or violated? Well, it can lead to a range of negative outcomes. Number one, injustice. Ignoring natural laws, I mean, it results in unfair treatment of individuals or groups. It can lead to the violation of their rights and their liberties, because if we can't even agree what is or is not unfair treatment, society can easily degrade into an anything goes worldview, and every person for themselves mindset. How often do we see justice not applied equally to all people? We have racial injustices, but we also have injustices where the highly wealthy who can afford the most expensive attorneys get off with things that the average person could never even dream of getting off with. That starts to happen. Conflict. When natural laws are ignored, it can lead to conflict, social unrest. As individuals and groups, they struggle to assert their rights and defend their interests as defined by each group separately. In a world that is devoid of any natural law, that you can't get agreement on what a person's rights should be, pretty much everything goes. You can choose your own reality, actually. And this, as we have seen, especially in the LGBTQ plus community, and that idea you get to choose your gender. And we get the pretzel bending debate of, can you choose your biological state or is it just a psychological state? I mean, I mean, things that were previously generally accepted to be obvious. What is a man? What is a woman? Now are red hot contentious topics. They are. I can't take another detour today. I've already been detoured enough, but I promise later we're going to go there and we're going to discuss the huge problems as traditional ideas of gender collide with a postmodern worldview. It's a very hard and it's a very complex issue to dissect, and there is no perfectly right and wrong answer. But for right now, I'm going to say to myself, focus, before I go down in another rabbit hole and turn this podcast into like a 2.5 hour event. But natural law, what would be another downside to the loss of natural laws? Spiritual and moral decay. Because as individuals and societies, as they lose touch with just fundamental principles of right and wrong, which were previously agreed upon, and people become disconnected from their inner selves and the world around them. In a world without natural laws, what is and is not acceptable and moral and spiritual becomes very fluid, dangerously fluid. As a civilization strives to keep this cohesive center together, things start to fall apart in society. It isn't uncommon for a superpower strong civilization to rot and corrupt from the inside out. I mean, sort of like a sports team. The teams that tend to win championships, they're united, they're supportive, they're working towards a common goal with a common purpose, and they believe in the same things, and they strive together to reach their best. For a civilization where the natural laws that used to bind the country together, when they begin to falter, division and anger and distrust can ensue. Do you think division, anger, distrust, are they on the rise in the United States and all across the globe, or are they declining? Do people seem to be, rowing together for a common good, or do they tend to try and rip each other apart? Well, if you feel they're starting to rip, society's kind of ripping itself apart, you're witnessing the corrosion in many ways of those natural laws that held the United States together. So in short, like I'm ever short, ignoring natural laws can have serious and far-reaching consequences for individuals and society. And they can undermine the very foundations of a just and prosperous society. But let's transition back to Aquinas just for a minute, because I always like to read just short little passages from him. So you can hear from the person himself rather than me just talking about it. So I'm back in that book, Summa Theologia, and it's broke into a number of questions. And I'll just call out the questions, and then he gives an answer. And so I'll call it out. So if you do want to go back and read it yourself in detail, you can. So we're going to look at question number 91. And the title of that chapter is The Various Kinds of Law. It's Article 4. And Aquinas says this, quote, "Whether there was any need for divine law, I answered that besides the natural and the human law, it was necessary for the directing of human conduct to have a divine law. And this for 4 reasons. First, since man is ordained to an end of eternal happiness, therefore it was necessary that, besides a natural and a human law, man should be directed to his end by a law given by God. Secondly, because on account of the uncertainty of human judgment, especially on contingent and particular matters, it was necessary for man to be directed by a law given by God. For the certain that such a law cannot err or go wrong. Thirdly, a man is not competent to judge of inferior movements that are hidden, but only of exterior things. Consequently, human law could not sufficiently curb and direct interior acts. And it was necessary a divine law should supervene. Fourthly, because as Augustine says, humans cannot punish for bad or evil deeds. Since we're aiming to do away with all evils, it would hinder the advance of the common good, which is necessary for human intercourse. An order, therefore, but no evil might remain unpunished. It was necessary to have a divine law which forbids all sin. So I don't want to steal any thunder from a later explanation, which we're going to get to in modernism, and one of the most profound minds, Friedrich Nietzsche. But when we read Aquinas and his arguments that we need natural law from a God, Nietzsche was a philosopher that said the opposite. Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God in 1882. It was a significant event in the history of human thought and philosophy, and it had far-reaching consequences for how we understand our world and ourselves. Now, Nietzsche claimed that the decline of traditional religious beliefs and values created an amazing opportunity for humanity to create new, more fulfilling ways of life based on our own individuality, our own will, and our own creativity, free from the shackles of religion, finally. However, at the same time, and keep in mind he was an atheist, he warned everyone that the death of God also had the very dangerous and very profound possibility that a dark sense of pessimism, of materialism, of nihilism, and moral uncertainty could then bloom, which would be dangerous, even more dangerous than religion if humans didn't take advantage of the opportunity to rise above religion. Nietzsche knew that without a clear sense of purpose or values, individuals easily fall into despair or some apocalyptic anything-goes world of immorality that's focused purely on sensual pleasures or material pleasures that could just easily step in and take it. And this would be a more destructive world than even a world almost dominated by religion. Remember, though, again, he was an atheist, and he didn't want to give much credit, like ever, to religion. So far, I think it's safe to say that this grand debate of a natural law from God or an individual law by man, open society and having an open society of blooming connectedness above and beyond anything religion could create has failed, maybe miserably, to manifest itself in society. I think few can really argue that now, in our postmodern world, we're more moral, we're more ethical, we're more connected, we're more kind, we're more humble than we used to be when these natural laws held a much firmer grasp. I mean, they never hold a perfect grasp, right? I mean, let's not be silly about it. We never have it perfect. We're not talking about perfection. And that's one of the biggest problems in debate that I see between theologians and atheists. They want this binary, and they're always whacking at each other. And it gets all nasty and petty and gross. It doesn't have to be like this. But the reality is probably Nietzsche's fears of society crumbling versus flourishing without religion probably appear to be at this point more true. All right, so continuing with Summa Theologia, question 94, and this chapter is titled Natural Law. It's article number 5, whether the natural law can be changed. So this is really a big question, and Aquinas needed to take it. But can natural law be changed? Or can natural laws evolve over time? Or are they always 100% permanent all the time? Here's what Aquinas says. Quote, The practical reason, on the hand, is busy with contingent matters, and consequently, though there is a principle of logical necessity and the general principles of the natural law, the more we descend into the matters of detail and the facts of specific cases, the more frequently we encounter defects. It is right and true for all to act according to reason. And from this principle, it follows as a proper conclusion, for example, that goods entrusted to another should be restored to their owner of this is true for the majority of cases. But it may happen in a particular case that it would be injurious and therefore unreasonable to restore goods held in trust. For instance, if they were claimed for the purpose of fighting against one's country. And this principle will be found to fail the more accordingly as we descend further into detail. Let me stop the quote just one moment, and repeat this line for you. And this principle will be found to fail the more accordingly as we descend further into detail. Okay, remember that. Let me continue. Quote, because of the greater number of conditions added, the greater number of ways in which the principle may fail, so that it may not be right to restore or not to restore. Consequently, we must say that the general principles of natural law are the same for all, both as to rectitude and as to knowledge, and all the conclusions that we draw from these general principles are the same for all in the majority of cases, both as rectitude and as to knowledge. Yet, in some few cases, it may fail, both as to rectitude and to knowledge. Yes, in the Psalms, the reason is perverted by evil. So that Julius Caesar tells us, for example, that theft, although it is expressly contrary to the natural law, was not considered wrong among the Germans, end quote. So the reality is, sorry for that little thing, I lost my place in the book there, but so the deeper we go into the cultural issues, the less permanent natural laws become. It is the big picture things. Don't murder, don't steal, don't do harm. They are lasting and they are permanent. But the deeper we go into tiny little details in tiny specific cases, the more things can evolve and change. As questions do always arise, especially in our postmodern world, that with the quote, well, that doesn't apply to me anymore. The natural laws, at least on the big things, simply don't change. The tiny weeds of things, yeah, they sometimes change. Now, for example, the concept of natural law in ancient Greek society was focused primarily on the idea of a good life and the pursuit of excellence, whereas in the medieval Christian society, natural law was seen as reflecting the divine will of God and the moral order of the universe. Today, our understanding of natural law is shaped by a bunch of factors, including scientific knowledge, ethical, political values, social and cultural norms. As our understanding of these factors evolve, so do sometimes our understanding of natural law and the role it plays in society. But that doesn't mean that murder is good, that you should steal other people's stuff, and that you should lie, cheat, and steal. These things still hold because they're firmly embedded inside of the concept of natural law. But you know, in this postmodern world, the small details seem to be taking over. Do you notice everybody says my reality? My reality on this is my belief is this. And if my belief is this, then that's the truth. The smaller and smaller you go, the deeper and deeper into the individual and even inside the psychology of the individual. And when every single person starts to believe that they get to create their own truth on everything, natural laws will, pardon the pun, naturally break down. So in one sense, it can be argued that natural law can and should evolve over time because the needs and values of societies change, the technologies change. With one big warning that the core fundamental beliefs of the metaphysical God are not to be abused and manipulated for evil ends. So changes, when necessary, should never be one on a trending timeline on Twitter, but they require an ongoing process of critical reflection and debate and critique about the purpose and the outcomes of this natural law. We have to use our reason. Aquinas would just beg us to use our reason whenever you run into those instances where maybe natural law needs to change. Question 94, Natural Law, Article 6. Whether the law of nature can be abolished from the heart of man. Ooh, that's a big one. This is a really big one. Can you eliminate, I talked earlier that Nietzsche said God was dead. So could it be that we could remove completely the idea of natural law from inside of us and eliminate it? And Aquinas said, quote, "The natural law can be blotted out from a human heart, either by evil persuasion or by vicious customs and corrupt habits, as among some men, theft and even unnatural vices," end quote. So if left unchecked or corrupted, natural law to Aquinas could be blotted out. I mean, it can be destroyed. But this is powerful. The real part of humanity, natural laws are real. They're a real part of humanity. As real as a heart or a lung might be. And these natural laws can only be blotted out from our own failings. Natural laws can be blotted out from our own failings. As natural law is in us and it works and it's real until, our own evil, our own inherent habits and choices cause it not to work. I mean, our biological heart works, but if we fill it with horrible food, have bad habits like smoking or drinking, and we lay around watching TV every single night covered in Cheeto dust or potato chip scraps, then that heart's going to get corrupted. The same with natural laws. We have these natural laws ingrained in us, but if we're not careful, if we're not diligent, or if we get lazy or complacent, we can see the natural laws become corrupt, which can then lead to the very fabric of that society being ripped out from underneath us. Question number 96. The power of human law, article number 4, and the question, whether human law binds a man in consciousness. Quote, on the other hand, laws may be unjust in many ways. First, by being contrary to human good. By the authority it poses on its subjects that are burdensome laws, conducive not to the common good, but rather to their own cupidity or vainglory. Or in respect of the author, the man makes a law that focuses on the power committed to a person. Or in respect of the form, as when burdens are imposed unequally on the community, although with a view to the common good. The like are acts of violence rather than laws. Because as Augustine says, quote, a law that is not just seems to be no law at all. As a result of which, such a laws do not bind into consciousness, except perhaps in order to avoid scandal or disturbance, for which cause a man should even yield his right. Secondly, laws may be revoked by being opposed to the divine good, such as the laws of tyranny, induced idolatry, or laws that do anything else contrary to the divine laws. In the laws of this kind, we must resist, because as stated in Acts 5:29, we ought to obey God rather than man. End quote. If I may return to Nietzsche one more time. if God is in fact dead, as the famous atheist claims, where does that leave us in regards to morality and laws? It's a very serious question. Killing God or a God is one thing. Figuring out how to build a complex civilization better and kinder and more open and uniting versus dividing society into everybody's own individual whims, its desires, its materialism, that's a whole nother question. Aquinas believed that without adequate replacement for a Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic natural law foundation, we are in danger of replacing natural law with some of the worst human traits. The danger that you and I face in our culture wars raging everywhere today lies in the potential for morality to be twisted, manipulated by those in power, leading to persecution, oppression, division, even genocide. And in the end, the dangers of a society without morality lies not in the morality itself, but in the people who create a definition of it, then wield it, and their capacity for cruelty and abuse of power once the concept of natural laws are destroyed from a metaphysical God. Once they are gone, we're in trouble. Whether you're a person of faith or not, we must evaluate carefully the sources and the individuals enacting our laws. And are they serving the greater good? Or if these laws are driving us further and further into an abyss of nothingness, or in the minimum, exacerbating inequalities and division. I mean, this is surely something for all of us to think about. All right, I think that's enough. I feel that was a lot for today. It's a complex topic. So Thomas Aquinas, a towering figure in the world of philosophy and theology, his writings on natural law and ethics and the existence of God revolutionized the way we think about these subjects, and his influence can still be felt today, centuries after his death. And I hope your perspective of this great individual is now broader than before, as he surely fits our jaunt that we're taking across wisdom literature. I think Aquinas' brilliance is not only in his intellect, but also in his ability to synthesize these different schools of thought and reconcile sometimes incompatible ideas between his philosophy and his theology. Because he seemed to walk on that razor's edge of philosophy and theology so incredibly well. And his emphasis on reason and faith, as well as his deep understanding of the human condition, I mean, it really made him a beacon of light in the medieval era. And he's one of the primary figures that will thrust us into modernism, which we're going to get to very, very soon. Aquinas' works just continue to inspire and challenge scholars, philosophers, and theologians, and most importantly, can challenge all of us. So I do want to encourage you to read more on Aquinas. Sometimes I sound like a broken record, but go deeper. Go into the weeds more than I can go on an episode here. Subscribe to that Substack page. Read more from Aquinas for free. I have hyperlinks over there on that Substack page. If you go to the show notes, you're going to see the link and subscribe. I mean, you can literally read his books for free. But thank you once again for listening in, and I hope you have a wonderful week. All the best to you and yours, and until the next episode, take care.